Hello, my name is Mark Brown. I've been in the video game industry for 20 years now. I got my start back in 1998. Back in college, I was studying to be an architectural engineer. I lived with some roommates who were computer science engineers. They had aspirations to start their own video game company. And using the Quake editor I picked up pretty fast because I found I was really good with AutoCAD and those type of programs. I picked up the Quake editor really well. So together we made an add-on pack using the Quake engine that we later shopped around, try to pick up our video game contracts. We ultimately failed and broke up. I took my Quake maps and I submitted them to Monolith Productions in Seattle. And a phone call later, they offered me a job working on their next game. I agreed to, and within a month, I hopped on a train and moved out here, and been in Seattle for the last 20 years. At Monolith, I helped out finish Shogo. It was in the finishing stages, so I got to learn their editor. And doing so, I helped place pickups in their single player and multiplayer, ammo pickups and whatnot. After that project, I moved on to Blood 2. They were also in their finishing stages, so I kind of followed suit and just helped them clean up their game. After that, I helped out with an add-on pack for Blood 2 that I was lucky enough to contribute a few of my own levels towards. From there, I worked on a game called Sanity Icons Artifact. This was the first game I worked on from the start to finish. I was a level designer. I created the level, all the geometry. Back then, it was our job to art it out. I put textures on everything. I added lights, and then the levels would then go off to like an artist. They would then kind of polish up the lighting and create any sort of custom textures that were needed. During the later phases, the level script would be handed to me from the leads. I was given maybe about 2 weeks to kind of implement the script on a per level basis. That entailed creating all the enemy encounters, all the puzzles, all the dialogue choices, the dialogue trees that the player was allowed to do, and all the boss encounter puzzles. That part was really tough. I remember staying up till 2 a.m. in the morning, just cranking away, getting as much content done as I could, and that was my baby. That was my first baby. From there, I moved on to Aliens vs. Predator 2. The game was already in production when I joined, so on that project, I took a lot of the geometry and I kind of aliened it up. I had to put the alien black goo. I added additional polys everywhere in a bunch of settings. I was responsible for creating a bunch of encounters, very specific alien encounters when you close a door and then aliens would kind of bang against the door and eventually the door would break open and an alien swarm would come in and get you. I did a lot of that type of work. I helped out with the cinematics quite a bit by keyframing the Predator ship. It would kind of fly in and kind of hover in place and then fly away. I did a lot of those type of moments, keyframing cinematic moments where Predator would kind of walk in and you'd kind of be like a stasis pod and you could see out, but a predator would kind of come in. That's really you in like a different part of the mission, and then you would kind of fulfill a little task and you kind of walk on. I did a lot of those type of moments. What was cool about that game was towards the end of the project, it was like after beta, I came up with an idea for a really cool chest burster sequence where you just face hug the guy, and then the next scene you're actually inside the chest cavity of your victim, and you had to kind of chew through and burst out, which would then result in another cinematic. We ended up getting Best Moments of the Year award in it's like PC Magazine or Consumer Game Magazine, one of those. Uh, made me really really excited. Uh, I worked with an artist to get that scene, to get that part done, as well as an audio engineer. So the three of us took maybe a day or two of scripting, and yeah, we ended up winning. It's more of an honorable award. It wasn't really official, but that was really fun. I contributed to some multiplayer maps as well. Um, oh, I should go back and say Insanity Icons Artifact. I also took a bunch of single player maps and converted them over into multiplayer by taking a level, chopping in half, mirroring it, and so both sides had like their equal sides. It could then come in and fight. So yeah. So after AVP 2, I worked on the Matrix Online. There, I was the sole interior designer. I was responsible for all the interiors to all of our buildings. How we pulled that off was working with an engineer. He made me a like a painter system where you could kind of like marquee and select a little area, and then it would fill in with like a very specific piece set. Then you can hold down letters like the D key. You can place like a door on the outer wall, and that wall would turn into like a little wall with a door built in, or windows, or you can lay down carpet, or protrusions coming out of the wall and whatnot. So every time a new piece set came in, I was responsible for kind of creating the rule set that the painter would then recognize and know the proper rules to follow. I would then be responsible for taking a bunch of props, organizing them like like a desk with a bunch of litter on top. I'd then take that and turn it into prefabs. I can make a bunch of different versions of that prefab, so it would randomly place one of those prefabs when you populate it. Any type of lamps or light sources, I would put some light globes around to kind of help light the room a bit. I'd bake in enemy spawners as well as any sort of game mechanics that the players would need to run into. I'd work with the mission designers in determining where these areas would be. Like a safe you'd have to crack, or computer you'd have to hack, whatever the objective for the mission at the time would be. So after I bake all those together into the rooms, I'd throw the building shell on, and then we'd bake the entire building down, and then I would hand those off to the exterior designers, who would then take the buildings and sidewalks and parks, and they'd make all the exterior stuff. So then the game got sold off to Sony Online, where they wanted, part of the deal was they had to have 30 of the top people who knew the most about the game to kind of transition over from Monolith Productions to Sony. And I was one of the lucky few to be considered for this role, and I went over and spent 3 months transitioning the game over to their servers. I helped rebalance a lot of the loot drops, a lot of the weapons and clothing you'd wear. I was also responsible, interior spaces, I was also responsible for all the dungeon scenes and all the bosses. So I kind of spruced a lot of that up. I helped create a document on, where the live team would go from that point on. And that took up the whole 3 months, at which point, the game got moved into their servers, and they promptly let all of us go. Yeah, it sucked. From there, I went on to Amaze Entertainment. they lured me in with the Call of Duty license, which I'm a huge Call of Duty fan. Uh, it was for the PSP, what made it even a bigger challenge. As well as they didn't their scripting system was all done in Lua, so I had to learn the PSP engine. I had to learn scripting in Lua, and it was quite a bit of challenge because we could only have no more than 5 enemies on screen at a time. So two armies fighting, trying to create like a real epic war sequence. You need to have your enemies as well as your friendlies. So you would have like 3 enemies and 2 friendlies. The allies would just kind of run in front of you and they get killed and they just constantly be respawning. They kind of run to a cover point, take a hit and die. Kind of create up, there's a lot of challenges with how do we spawn enemies in such a way that it feels like there's more than what there really are. A lot of enemies were kind of on like their little stationary Gatling guns, so the enemy would actually be just geometry of the gun itself until you shot them. Then they'd be replaced with like a real low skeletal model that would animate and fall off the gun. Little tricks like that. On that project, I also did all of the collision. All of the collision entailed, every level I was responsible for. I did a lot of different bullet impacts, off of the terrain would be different from metal, would be different off of wood, because all the wood chips getting sprayed or dirt flying in the air. So I'd have to kind of apply special material, very simple materials to a lot of these collisions, so to kind of get the proper effects to kind of spray off. I added nav mesh as well for the AI, so they knew how to move around a map. I was given that job because I was the level designer who best knew Maya the best. I was the guy, and I got it done in a relatively decent time frame. We were all happy with. I contributed some structures, some artistic structures to a few multiplayer maps, like barracks. I designed out and I actually built to completion, and they made it in the game. From there, I moved over to X-Men Origin Wolverine for the Wii. Not to be confused with the Raven version. Raven, they made the next gen game. So I was the very first level designer brought in on X-Men Origins, and I got to document out a lot of the level design, a lot of missions, including the very first mission of the game. I did a lot of boss fight documentation, including Victor Creed, Sabretooth. He was also the very first boss of the game. So this kind of created the prototype needed to kind of get our game approval to Activision to get made. And that was a big honor. I did, once again, I did a lot of white boxing for a good chunk of the missions. I did a lot of implementing bosses and missions using, at this time we did not use Lua. We had a visual-based, like a node-based system, very similar to Unreal Kismet. So that was really fun getting used to, because I'm definitely more of like a visual guy. I really learned that scripting, and there was nothing I couldn't do. I made some really great sequences that when we met up with Raven, they actually took some of my ideas, like the Victor Creed boss fights. I remember them having trouble on their end with the feel, how it needs to feel. But they looked at what I did, and they said in a meeting, yes, we want that feel, with how that's been implemented. And they took my idea and they kind of took it to the next gen level version of it, as well as we took one of their ideas, and we needed their next gen idea was you're at the water dam and you're doing battle in one of the auxiliary water runoff tunnels, and there are all these like military jeeps in the area, and you're fighting them. And then out of desperation, the military opened up the valve, which brought in this big wave of water. Um, the military guys hopped in their jeeps. They started driving away, and you were like lunging from jeep to jeep, killing off these militants at the same time as water was slowly catching up to you. So you'd constantly be lunging to to the next closest jeep, and then eventually you kind of lunge to a little safety area, so a ladder kind of taking you out. And it was really tough taking their next gen gameplay and then reducing it down to so it can run on the Wii. And it took me quite a bit to get that working. A lot of smoke and mirrors were involved, but it was done with success. So from there, I moved on to, see, was it Marvel Superhero Squad. I also did a lot of white boxing, a lot of collision and nav mesh for that game. A lot of scripting. Starting at beta, we had no cinematics in place. So all the level designers kind of got together and started contributing cinematics. And very early on, the lead designer came to me and said that I had the best eye for the cinematic work. And he took all the other designers off that task, and he put it all on my plate. And good thing was I didn't have to worry about any of the bugs in the gameplay. I just had to worry about getting all these cinematics made. I worked with a bunch of animators, any animator in the building that was freed up that could contribute some animations we would use. I did it. I was responsible for I would receive the thumbnails, and then I would then implement the where the camera goes, where all the actors stand, their movement, all the scripting involved in getting cinematics to work. And that took from beta to about maybe 2 weeks before the game shipped, which was a lot of stress on my part. I just remember thinking in the back of my head, oh God, I hope I'm not making any bugs. QA is not going to be finding these. But luckily, I think I might have only created like one bug, which I think I discovered, and I went back and I fixed. And by the time it shipped, there wasn't any bugs introduced, which great success. I worked on the sequel. This game used the U-Draw tablet. Both these two games are done by THQ, which is no longer around. I was the lead content designer on the second game. We learned our lesson, so we outsourced all the cinematics to a company up in, I think, Vancouver, Canada. I was the contact, so all of their work went through me. I would implement it into the engine. Any bugs that I would find, I would talk to them directly. They would get it done as fast as they could and give me the fixes. And the process worked really well. I just remember the big, thank you letter from them at the end of the game saying how much of a pleasure it was working with us. And it made me feel really good. I helped out on a few other games. Princess and the Frog we worked on for Disney. I didn't think I would like working on a princess game for little girls, but I mean, it was working. It actually felt like a Disney movie. The graphics were that good, and plus it's Disney. I grew up on Disney movies. I was responsible for all the hubs that you would return to. It was based off of mini games. So every time you finish up a mini game, you'd come to the hub, and then something would be upgraded in the hub. That I would be responsible for. Collecting beads. It was a big part of the game. It was built around Mardi Gras, so the bead collecting was fun. Implementing stories. Once again, we worked with the same outsource company that we used for the Marvel game. I would implement all their cinematics. I was responsible for like a little sing-along section. So I animated all the little fireflies that would kind of fly up in the screen and kind of greet you and laugh and fly away. And I remember using like a Audio Forge to kind of keyframe the little bouncing ball every time, the dialogue would be printed at the bottom for, you to sing along to. I do a little bouncy ball animation. I did that. I helped out on Kung Fu Panda. I remember the panda was really hard to light because he's black and white. So he's either overlit to show the blacks, but the whites would be super bright, or you'd underlight them so the whites looked good, but the blacks were super dark. So I had to basically come up with like a medium setting to kind of show off the panda in the best light possible. See, after that, after THQ went down, we got sold to Glu Mobile. So I became a senior designer working for them. Also, big challenge was we used the Unity engine for the first time. I never used Unity before. As well as there wasn't a whole lot of game scripting I would do. It was mostly using Excel and documentation. So I document, what my system was I'd be working in. I'd create any type of functions needed in Excel, because I'd had to create all this data that we'd then have to get implemented into the game. I worked on 2 games. One was like an RPG, like a city builder. You'd build a city, you build armies, you go and you attack other players' armies. I was responsible for creating dialogue for the missions. Get your building to level 5. You get whatever gold or resources. I'd write out dialogue as flavor text, because it was a fantasy game, so you have to write dialogue that's in a fantasy setting. I was responsible for in creating the vision for the technology tree and all the data associated with that. I was responsible for the PvE maps. When you're not fighting other players, you can do like little player versus enemy missions. You kind of create we kind of created this little hex grid map that would change in different environments. You'd have like little forests or deserts or mountain areas that you can collect very specific resources from. Using Excel, I would create a bunch of these maps, maybe like 20 maps that would, every day you'd get like a random map. Then from there, I worked on a arcade flight game where I was responsible for creating all the enemy progressions, all the missions. What type of enemies you'd find, what type of elements they had, and what levels they were. Enemy difficulty, whether it was like a defend an object or you're attacking a very specific base. I was responsible for doing camera fly-throughs, kind of showing these objects that you need to defend or attack, or as well as playing VO. I was responsible for creating the economy. Once you beat a mission, you get rewarded with both soft and hard currency. It was my job to kind of go in and populate all that data. After that game shipped, I was helping out on a real-time, or actually not real-time, a historic-based flying game. Kind of leverage our flying mechanics. We wanted to kind of take on World of Warplanes, I believe, by making like a little mobile version of it. Very early on in development, there's a big layoff that came by that took out 50% of the company. It was the second layoff of Glu Mobile in this area I was a part of. Now, after 3-4 years, Glu Mobile's not even around here anymore. They had so many layoffs over the course they've been here. They're not around. So I took a little pit stop to Linden Lab after that. It was just like a six. It started off being like a 3-month contract. They wanted a designer to design out 2 regions of a space. One of them was a tutorial for when new players came into the game. They didn't have any tutorial up to that point, so players didn't know how to move or interact. And you'd get a lot of trolls kind of standing around these spawn points making fun of them, making fun of these new people. They felt like they wanted a tutorial mission. So I created tutorial islands for them, as well as when you progressed off of that, you go to the social island. So I made these 2 islands. We originally wanted an artist to kind of follow in after me, except he couldn't grasp how to like upload data to the Second Life engine. So he ended up getting let go, and they just used me as the artist. So my contract extended to 6 months, where I created all the geometry, all the collision. It was the goal to buy assets from the Second Life store and use those to kind of populate the world. Much of the assets were just over budget in terms of poly counts and texture sizes. So when QA came in and they said, you know, poly counts way too heavy in these areas, it fell on my shoulders to kind of go back into Maya. I'd kind of recreate these assets, but you know, lower quality, like realistic game assets you would get in any type of video game. The quality didn't really decrease any, so it still felt very, you know, very high end. My producer I worked under was real happy. If you know anything about Second Life, you know, a bunch of people can go into the world and collaborate real time, and everyone kind of contributes together. So working some late hours, it would be me and my producer working through the midnight hours, kind of populating these worlds. Like I would not stop working until my producer, my boss, had quit. And from what I heard, his boss was really happy with him, and so therefore he was happy with me, my work. So that lasted for 6 months, and then at which point I went to Monolith Productions. There I had 2 contracts. One contract for Shadow of War, and then that was like a 1.5-year contract. And then I only had like a 3-month downtime, and then they brought me back for a 2-year contract for the Shadow of War. There I learned some of the mocap work. I helped out direct animation in the mocap studio. I helped clean up mocap and get it kind of redirected onto our game characters. I learned Motion Builder, how to constrain objects. You know, I'd create little Motion Builder scenes for our layout artists. I'd put in the characters. I'd throw on the rough motion capture story tracks. If there was any objects need held, I'd constrain those objects to players' hands as they handed them off to each person. At one point during the second game, we needed to do a Shelob spider, which Motion Builder only does bipeds and quadrupeds, not octopeds. So I learned how to do an IK-FK rig in Motion Builder that we then handed that off to our hand keyer. And there's like maybe 2 rounds. He then came back to me with suggestions on how to improve the rig. I made those improvements, sent them back, and it went back twice. And he was really happy with, and his animations look amazing in the game. Let's see what else. I was responsible for adding props in creating set dressing. Because in these games, you could fight 20 players at once, so you have to have a lot of open ground to fight. But during cinematics, of course, a lot of open ground is real boring to look at. So they want these areas to kind of feel more lived in. So it would be my job to kind of go out there, see what assets we had, and kind of populate these scenes. Now, during the second game, they wanted it to be super epic. there's talk about these big epic, wars between, the two sides, and we have asking around, we have never done anything on this scale before. The engineers had no idea how many enemies you can get on screen at a time before the game crashed. So I took that as a challenge. I went out and I researched a bunch of crowd simulation software. I got evaluation copies for Massive, Golem Army, and we ended up settling on My Army, which was the quickest to learn. There's a lot of little videos on YouTube they posted, easiest to kind of grasp. It took me maybe about a month to learn, and then I made a few little test scenes, big explosions where all the characters would go ragdoll when they fly up in the air. Weapons would fall out of their hands and everything. And I got my cinematic team really excited for that work. That they went ahead and they ended up buying the software. And then I spent the last 6 months of production across. I was responsible for 5 computers. It was My Army was a Maya plugin that I would then bring in the game art, the world art. I then create, proxy versions of the terrain, any type of collision I would need. Enemies would work off like a spline-based road systems. I would build, and then of course all the logic that goes into these crowds. And there must have been maybe 12 scenes I was responsible for. That I had 5 computers. I'd constantly remember myself going in every hour to each of these computers and just baking out these skeleton animations that I worked with our technical artist as well with an engineer to kind of make this all possible. Technical artist just basically wrote me a Python script that would do a batch process of exporting all the bone data. And then the engineer would then kind of create me a version to kind of quickly be able to import all these bones on the game side. So through both their help, I was able to get, I think one time I was able to do 12,000 characters filling up the arena, and it looked amazing. A lot of these scenes were like too heavily packed that my boss would say, you got to lighten up, because after these cinematics are done, there's going to be a real game, real-time moments where you're going to see a dramatic decrease of enemies. So yeah, we kind of had a little battle, determining how much is too much. And in the end, I think we settled on basically 12,000 characters on screen. It made our marketing material look amazing. Art director only had 2 complaints with my work, which I was able to fix. It was just they were real small, and I made everyone happy in the end. Creating these characters, I would start with our actual asset from the game. I would bring into Maya. I would reduce the LODs. I would remove a lot of the bones in their hands and their faces, a lot of their roll joints in their arms and legs. I'd reweight their skinning to the existing bones. I must have made 20 unique characters, low poly characters of different. We had like a buff guy, a fat guy, a thin guy, different holding different weapons, spears, archers, swords, shields. That I really made the armies believable. See, I was responsible for creating doing all the wiring on the world, or on the video game side of things. So when we would export the animations from Motion Builder, we can easily apply them to the characters in the video game side. I did a lot of that. I helped out with marketing, taking screenshots, setting up very specific cinematics unique to their needs. And that's basically everything at Monolith. My most recent work was I got together with a few people from Monolith, a few of my really close, tight-knit friends, and we want to do a VR game using Unity. So now I've learned C Sharp. Since I was the only one unemployed, all the work kind of falls on me. I went out, I found a bunch of art assets that we could buy. We use like DAZ 3D to get the art assets. I used Maya to kind of convert everything, all these work assets over and export them out as Unity assets. To which we kind of created this nice little game space. We wanted to do like a lot of monitors everywhere that you click on a monitor and it takes you into like an actual video, like a real-time movie with real actors. So we're mixing, real world actors with in-game Unity gameplay. And then you kind of go back and forth. It's all VR. This is my first time learning VR. I've been using Gear VR as my demo platform. It's our hope to one day create a prototype and ship it around to one of the people that works in our company. He's currently works at Microsoft, so we might ship it to them to look at. And yeah, so that's where I'm at now. That's my story. I hope that's enough for you. I see 35 minutes. It seems like a good little interview for you guys. All right, so I hope this interview has been real useful. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me. My email is Noffler, Noffler @gmail.com, and you can see my online resume and portfolio at my website, www.markbrowndesigner.com. So thank you for checking this out. Have a nice day.